So let's call this A, B, C, D, and E. So we're given that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. And you might be wondering, where is angle 1? So this is going to be angle 1, and here is angle 2. And also C is the midpoint of AE. So go ahead and prove that segment AB is congruent to segment ED. So number one, let's start with, let's see, the angle. So angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. So that's given. Now our goal is to prove that triangle ABC is congruent to EDC. If we can do that using CPCTC, we can prove that this statement is correct. But angle 1 and 2 are outside of those two triangles. And we need angles that are inside the two triangles. So let's call this angle 3 and angle 4. Now if angle 1 is 100 degrees, that means angle 2 is 100. Now 1 and 3 forms a linear pair. They're supplementary. That means 3 has to be 80 and 4 has to be 80. So therefore angle 3 and angle 4 are congruent to each other. So let's write that in the next statement. Angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. And the reason for that is supplements of congruent angles are congruent to each other. And so let's mark that. So 3 is congruent to 4. Now let's move on to the next part. C is the midpoint of AE. And that's a given. So what can we conclude anytime we have a midpoint? A midpoint separates a segment into two equal segments. So we could say that segment AC is congruent to segment CE. And the reason is definition of a midpoint. Now the last thing we could do is prove that these angles are congruent. So in step 5, we could say that angle ACB is congruent to angle ECD. And the reason vertical angles are congruent. Now let's move on to step 6. So now we can prove that the triangles are congruent. We have an angle, a side, and an angle. So let's say that triangle ACB is congruent to triangle ECD. And that's using the side angle, actually that's the wrong one. It's the ASA angle, side angle postulate. And the first angle that we proved was angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. So that's based on statement 2. And then for the S, we proved that AC is congruent to CE, so that's statement 4. And then statement 5, the vertical angles So it's based on 2, 4, and 5, angle, side angle. And now finally, we could say that segment AB is congruent to segment ED based on CPCTC.